Recently, there was a lot of talk surrounding Knights of X #4, Tini Howard's masterpiece. Well, Tini Howard thinks so. I really wish I could have the confidence in my own abilities that Tini Howard has in hers, because she thinks she's done something amazing with this Betsy Braddock, Rachel Summers story where they finally kissed for the first time, and it's supposedly been led up to. They've been talking about this for years, and then you realize no one has ever insinuated that these two characters were attracted to each other than Tini Howard, and there are decades of stories, shockingly, that do not support that these two characters could be attracted to each other. But Tini Howard thinks that they have done an amazing job. She actually went to her Substack to brag about it in one of her newsletters. And there's so many funny things in here. I had to cover it. Yes, we talked about the issue, but we didn't get to talk about what Tini Howard has to say about it. And just, it's good stuff. Let's put it that way. I've got some real gems from Tini Howard, including an excerpt recently from an EW article I'll throw in at the end where she really just trashes Brian Braddock, and you can kind of tell that she hates men, but this is what Tini Howard bragging about Knights of X #4 on Substack. This is what it sounded like. Knights of X confirms the long simmering feelings between Betsy Braddock and Rachel Summers with a big, deep, wet kiss. Captain Britain has a girlfriend, and her girlfriend has started going by a Scotty. And all it took was for each of you to have a deeply personal quest to the center of your souls. Jeez, girls aren't frustrating. Siege Perilous, man, what a hell of a place. I'm not lying. A professional writer, she gets paid to write for a living, put that in her newsletter. That's how people speak on Twitter and TikTok and stuff. And if you read her Knights of X series, and before that, her Excalibur series, it's literally unreadable because the dialogue is trash, because that's what all the fucking characters sound like, because she's not writing about Betsy Braddock and Captain Britain and the Pet Britain Corps or Gambit and Rogue and all that stuff. She's just writing herself as if she were all the fucking characters, and that's why they all come off sounding like a bunch of nerds and geeks. How people can claim that Tini Howard is some type of like a professional writer or comic book writer, I will never know. She's LARPing as a comic book writer. Maybe it kind of fits in with her whole thing that she's doing. She definitely wants to be LARPing more than she wants to be comic book writing. And not shocking, if you read Knights of X #4, this moment doesn't feel all that amazing. Sure, there are lots of butterflies, but it kind of comes out of nowhere. You're like, wow, the only person that ever thought that this should happen is Tini Howard, and somehow she just gets to make these kinds of big changes within the Marvel Comics universe because there is no proper oversight. You have a legion of doofuses being led by the biggest doofus of all, Jordan White. And she kind of brags about that too. Listen to her talk about her posse, man. There are lots of supportive people along the way. My editors, Annalise Bisa and currently Sarah Brunstad, have always been in support of exploring these topics. Betsy's sexuality, Rachel's sexuality, and them as a relationship, as has Jordan D. White, the X Office's incredible lead editor. I couldn't and wouldn't ever do shit without my posse, Leah Williams and Vita Ayala, who have also been in the trenches with me every step of the way. She later continues, and our queer brothers, others, and sisters in the office who help me guide the conversations, express my frustrations, and cheer me on. We're doing it. We're going to keep doing it. Oh, I have no doubt that Tini Howard and her posse will continue doing it, as in destroying the X-Men brick by brick, piece by piece. You have just an inordinate amount of unqualified comic book creators in the X-Men office right now, being led by one of the most unqualified people to be in charge of anything, Jordan D. White. Has Jordan White ever written a successful comic book in his life? There was a time to be a group editor, you had to be kind of like somebody that sold comic books, somebody that had proven that they could actually write a story. But that is no longer the case. You just need to be a glad-handing yes man like Jordan White, and you can be in charge of stuff. I don't think Tini Howard understands how badly she has portrayed Annalise Bisa and Sarah Brunstad here, kind of throwing them under the bus, letting people know that these are the people that are also responsible for the terrible X-Men comics, specifically coming from Tini Howard, Vita Ayala, Leah Williams. Shockingly, those are some of the worst X-Men comics that are available right now. You got Excalibur, which was terrible. Knights of X, which was terrible. What else we got? We got X Factor, which was extra terrible. Trial of Magneto, which was terrible. New Mutants, which is maybe it's the best one of the bunch, but it's still not very good. And you also had Children of the Atom, which is exceptionally terrible. But that's her posse, and that's who she's rolling with. We've talked about this in the past, how you have this weird like perfect storm of bad creators all in one office that are trading ideas with each other that are actually making all the stories worse because you have no competent people in there. And the competent people that are in there, they're probably just writing their comic books and not providing much of the conversation. There's nothing really to be excited about as far as the creations that they've done there. Yes, you got to do some storylines that you thought were important that comic book readers are rejecting. They're not reading these. They aren't selling. But that won't stop Tini Howard from essentially giving herself a pat on the back. There's been some very kind recognition of that, and I just want to express my gratitude. I'm not exactly the type to gas myself up, and I have a hard time celebrating my accomplishments, but I've been able to celebrate this one as an accomplishment through it all, through all of you. Real talk, this book is one of the rare times in my life where I think every issue just gets better and better. It's part of why I'm so comfortable with our final issue coming next month with Knights of X #5. Read beginning to end, it feels like a perfect little 2.5-hour superhero movie. Knights of X was not solicited or ever intended to be a miniseries. It was solicited as an ongoing, and it got canceled after 2 issues. By the 3rd issue, and this is an X-Men comic, it was already on the precipice of dropping out of the top 100 comic sales for the month in June. I imagine #4, which we'll get the numbers for in a few days, will already be out of the top 100. Excalibur was canceled because the sales were bad. And they decided, well, we'll rejigger it and we'll call it Knights of X, but it'll be the same story. And shockingly, the story that wasn't working, that no one read because they realized what a terrible writer Tini Howard was, when they repackaged it, put a new coat of paint on it, but delivered the same quality and story, people didn't read it again. You're not being successful. In fact, you're becoming a laughingstock. The entire X-Men office is. Sure, there are a couple of high moments here and there, but pretty much across the board, X-Men comics today are kind of a joke. Nobody's reading them. Nobody's excited for them. And Tini Howard and Leah Williams and Vita Ayala, that big posse over there in the Marvel Comics X-Slack, are a big part of that. Obviously, Jordan White has the biggest part in it because he's supposed to be the leader. He's the one that's supposed to be fixing the stories and making sure what they're putting out isn't complete tripe, but it keeps coming out that way. Now, you're wondering, well, what is wrong with Tini Howard? She's a professional writer. Okay, she can't write dialogue. What else is she getting wrong about the characters? You got to hear this excerpt from this EW interview that she did talking about Brian Braddock. The biggest difference between Betsy and Brian is that Betsy is too smart to trust the narratives because she understands they weren't written for her. They were written for people like Brian. The fact that she knows that and isn't afraid to change the story is what scares the people in power. If you're Brian Braddock and you're a straight white man that lives in England and a magical man appears to you and says, I have a quest for you, you're more likely to trust that. Yeah, but if you're a queer woman and a mutant, and a man appears to you and tells you that he has something for you to do, that carries a different charge and a different level of trust. And if you're a suburban white woman in America living in the Portland area, no one is more entitled to everything than you. You get to criticize everything. You get to chastise a character like Brian Braddock, who you've never had a hand in doing anything with. You downgrade him. He's no longer Captain Britain. Now he's Captain Avalon or whatever. You upgrade her sister, I guess, to Captain Britain status. Guess what? It didn't really bring in a lot of readers. I wonder why people aren't liking your take on Excalibur. I wonder why people weren't coming along for the ride for Knights of X. Maybe it's because you have such a cynical, lame-ass perspective on Brian Braddock and his sister Betsy Braddock that you just don't write compelling X-Men stories. That is one of the dumbest quotes I've ever heard about comic books, and the perspective that Tini Howard is coming into her X-Men stories, and has been for a few years now, it's just wrong. It's not X-Men. This is her trying to do something else and try to reconfigure the X-Men into whatever story she actually wants to tell, because she doesn't want to be an X-Men writer. She doesn't want to be a comic writer. She wants to be a LARPer. She's LARPing as a comic book writer. She obviously wants to tell stories that don't fit in the Marvel Comics universe. So she bends and breaks the characters to her own will, to her own story. And shockingly, the story doesn't work and the characters never get over. I wish I was Tini Howard. I wish I could be so proud of something that has failed so spectacularly. But me personally, I have to look at the numbers in front of me. I have to say, am I being successful? Is this thing growing over the time? Are the changes I'm implementing in the work that I'm doing being well received? And if they aren't, what can I do to change the fortunes of myself, my channel, my small business here? If you're Tini Howard, if you're Leah Williams, if you're Vita Ayala, you don't have to live in the real world. You are not accountable to the quality of your work. You can fail time and time again and act like and perceive yourself to be this enormous success that has done all these amazing things in comic books. Tini Howard hasn't had a successful comic book run yet on any character, and now she's working at DC Comics. She's doing Catwoman. She's got another Batman-related comic book coming up with her husband, Blake, and it's going to fail too because Tini Howard cannot learn. When you are so happy with yourself and your performance that you cannot look at it and understand where you have failed, you can never get better. We talked about it earlier in the year here on the channel in depth. She had an interview kind of exposing herself and why she's such a hack comic book writer. She's not a professional. She's LARPing as a comic writer.